Hi, Catherine Maude here. I am doing my biology, history, and conflicts final project on epigenetics. So what is epigenetics? It is the study of how our environment and lifestyle changes the way our genes are expressed. And this is different than genetics because epigenetics changes aren't necessarily permanent. They certainly can be, but they aren't changing the DNA sequence. They're just they're methylation groups that attach to our DNA and change the way our DNA is read and then expressed. So how do these changes occur? Everything from diet to stress level to drug use, even prescribed or street drugs, physical activity, sleep levels, relationships can all affect which genes in our body are turned on and off. In fact, doing this study, I read an interesting article about how children that come from abusive families have a higher risk of cancer, a higher risk of obesity. They tend to age a lot faster. They are susceptible to getting sick more often, and this is likely due to a stress-induced methylation sequence that is epigenetics. So as I was saying, methylation is just a methyl group that attaches to the nucleic acid in our DNA, and it has phenotypic changes when the cell divides. So it can affect any cell in our body at any time, and it can stop at any time. But I found this picture to be really interesting. Let's pretend we are this blue germ cell inside of this embryo, inside of this mom. This mom is smoking. She is affecting her own body with epigenetics caused by methylation of her DNA. So she's making herself more prone to obesity, to heart disease, to lung cancer. We know she's probably affecting her baby. Her baby is very likely to have birth defects, but she's also very likely to have some epigenetic complications. And not only that, but this one person smoking that is pregnant is affecting 3 generations because now there's methylation of this embryo's germ cells, and that is going to affect this person here. So it's very serious, and it's a really good thing to understand because obviously the implications of this being a multi-generational issue is really important because, if I grow up in a place that is extremely polluted, and by the time I have kids, I move out to rural Montana, my offspring and their offspring are still going to be feeling the effects of that polluted environment I lived in 60 years ago. So it's really interesting, really important science. From a historical perspective, the term epigenetics was linked with the science of development and evolution. When we were doing that project about the historical perspective of the chromosome theory, that word was actually used a lot throughout the article. It just didn't quite mean what we know it to mean now because we didn't quite have the scientific context to understand, the mechanics of development. But due to our increased understanding, obviously this term has changed. Now it means changing the way genes are expressed because of environmental and lifestyle factors. It did stem from the original question, how does a single fertilized cell turn into a complex organism, which is something we know from this class the scientific community was very focused on. So once we kind of started studying this, embryologists fell into 2 categories of thought. One was that each cell contained elements that enlarged during development, which is called performationism. The other process is that chemical reactions along the soluble components of the genes or the nucleic acids, and then these chemical reactions executed a complex developmental plan, like kind of on top of the set in stone genes. And the current definition of epigenetics is kind of a mix of these. Obviously, the epigenesis school of thought was a little closer, but it really is kind of a combo of both of these schools of thought. So I always like when there's a compromise in discovery in the scientific community. So I kind of saw a parallel here between Darwin's idea of heredity and inheritance, because Darwin said that there were little chemical pieces of cells that were constantly being emitted by the mother and father, and when they reproduced, those little components combined to make a baby. And it kind of reminds me of that, except instead of cells emitting tiny little things that affect genes, it's more our lifestyle emitting little chemical things that affect our genes. It's almost kind of like the backwards view of Darwin's theories. I just kind of see a parallel there that I thought was interesting. So people kept working on this stuff, and in 1930, H.J. Muller, who was also working with the fruit flies, much like T.H. Morgan, discovered that there's a mutation which he called ever-sporting displacements, meaning he was noticing that there was a very rapid and very high rate of phenotypic variation and mutations. And this was, they thought that they were rearranging chromosomes, which they didn't know was possible, and which really made them question things. So this was watched very closely for the next 10 to 20 years. And during that time, actually in 1949, Delbruck began to realize that it wasn't the chromosomes being rearranged, it was biochemical reactions occurring on the chromosome that was causing these phenotypic mutations. So yeah, studying this is a really important piece of the current scientific world, because understanding and pinpointing how methyl groups affect us can help us confront things like obesity and the rising rates of depression, both things that are very heavily correlated with epigenetic reasoning. And also, I just think it's important for the scientific community to understand that gene expression and chromosome theory and everything is very multi-layered. It isn't just our chromosome, we get a chromosome from our mom and our dad and combine, and then that's that. There's so many layers to how we turn out, how our genes are expressed, how we behave, all of those things. And it's really important for us to understand that. I also think this is an important thing because I want anything we can. I really want a strong public demand for things like lower pollution levels, things that stop putting us at risk for obesity, because public demand is really the only way important changes are going to happen. And the more that people understand that our environment is affecting our health for generations, the more demand there will be and the more likely change is going to come. So I think it's really important for this information to be out there and to continue to understand it. And yeah, that's kind of the whole thing. Oops. Here's my citations. It was a great class. Really enjoyed learning about everything. Thanks for watching.